Hello indie game fans, here are indie game releases from 2023 which are on discount for the Steam Summer Sale, where more recent games are usually not as heavily discounted but are nonetheless great deals, with prices decreasing as the video goes on, beginning with Darkest Dungeon 2, a perhaps controversial pick since it is often compared to the original and people have very strong opinions about that. Yes, while this game is now in 3D, has upgraded visual flair and retains the turn-based positional combat, structurally this is a very different game, being much more run-based with the stagecoach being central rather than the hamlet. As such, it is a different thing, which is good on its own, but when compared to the original is where people get hung up on it, but I say don't worry about that and just enjoy it for what it is. One of the best games of last year is at 50% discount, where if you've been hanging around this channel, it will be no surprise that Blasphemous II makes the cut, a grimdark pixel art Metroidvania which is the sequel to a game from 2019 and has expanded upon it in many ways. For one, you do have multiple weapons to choose from, which provides variety, with the returning brutal executions being for the sickles in a good way. However, there isn't as much variety in bosses, with more humanoid-shaped and sized enemies as compared to the abominations in the original, but still, it's a great title overall and is worth a play. Another highlight of 2023 gets mentioned here in Cassette Beasts, a turn-based monster taming RPG, but one that is not so much like Pokemon but Digimon instead. The gimmick is that you're able to make a copy of a monster and then transform into one during battle, and then you can further combine any two creatures to form a more powerful hybrid, and with the DLC bringing it up to 141 monsters, there are a total of 19,881 possible combinations to try. They have been supporting this game post-launch, such as with multiplayer, which is interesting and is one of the best indie games in this genre. Some of you might not be aware of this game, which is surprising since Sunhaven has 15,000 Steam reviews, which easily translates to 1.5 million copies sold, so if you love the genre and don't own this, do consider picking it up. This is a farming game in a fantasy setting of monsters and elves, but at its core, you're still doing farming things like growing crops and upgrading your farm. It does also have the expected elements like romanceable villagers, mining, combat, story objectives, mini-games and more, with the combat portion being a little bit more involved and more resembles an action-adventure game. There's also quite a number of locations to explore and farm in, so it has a lot of content, and to add to the madness, there is multiplayer for up to 8 players at a time. The developers have gone kind of crazy with cosmetic DLC, but that is not necessary, so my advice is get the base game at 50% off and enjoy. Similarly, another fantastic entry from last year is Punch Club 2 Fast Forward, the return of a semi-idle management sim RPG in which you guide your fighter to become champion. In contrast with the original from 2016, this has more of a cyberpunk theme and setting, with the core training and upgrade systems being similar enough. The pixel art is fantastic as well, and I think is worth picking up whether or not you have played the original. One of the most underrated titles from 2023 is Voidigo, a top-down action roguelite which kind of looks like all the rest, so you might be asking, what is the fuss all about? Well, boss hunting is the key driver of this game, and the boss doesn't simply sit in the boss's room and wait for you to come kill it. Rather, it actively hunts you down, so any room can be turned into a boss fight, and when gravely wounded, the boss will also attempt to escape. The closest comparison would be Nuclear Throne in terms of combat and game feel, with a little bit of Enter the Gungeon in terms of weapon variety, all wrapped up with an awesome art style and is a must-get for fans of the genre. Developer Ace Team has always been a weird one, having some of the wildest, most out there ideas like Rock of Ages, as well as the Eternal Cylinder, but we must go back earlier to the Xenoclash games to get an understanding of Clash Artifacts of Chaos, a Souls-like brawler if you can call it that, in which our hero traverses across the world, punching and kicking enemies. I wouldn't say that I'm a fan of Xenoclash since I thought it was janky as hell, but there is somewhat of a cult following for that game, maybe look up some YouTube videos instead, with this being a spiritual successor of sorts, and it's a very weird but interesting game that is worth a shot at 70% discount.
I knew a Corwood once. He said he was no longer a slave of reality. He said he was free of all laws.
One of the releases from October 2023 that not enough people know about is Cavern of Dreams, a N64-style 3D platformer for all intents and purposes, in which our dragon protagonist explores the mysterious cavern to rescue their unhatched siblings. This game absolutely nails what they are going for, down to the visual style, controls, and even the collectible indicator, and would not be out of place on that console, and with 3D platformers becoming increasingly rare, this might be your jam. Speaking of platformers, an underrated release from last year is Bzzz, a title that is just fun to say, being a pixel art precision platformer that has been done before in concept, but is beautifully executed here. You are running, jumping, and using abilities like dash to make it through the level, picking up the bolt collectibles and poking around for secrets, all while avoiding lasers, spikes, and enemy projectiles. I love the look of this game, which is just so cleanly designed, and while it isn't mainstream popular like Celeste is, it's still of interest if you love the genre. A curious little puzzle platformer that you might not be familiar with is Moon Leap, in which it switches from day to night whenever you jump, which then leads to enemies and blocks reacting accordingly. This is bite-sized, cleverly designed, and has pretty pixel art and is for fans of the genre. Watch this video for more pixel art games.